Hello everyone, welcome to this special edition of Catalyst Magazine Live, which is supporting STEM Clubs Week themed to AI, the World and You. My name is Jo Mitchell and I am the STEM Enrichment Coordinator at STEM Learning.
Our guest today is Farah Egby, Agile Coach at Exscientia. Farah is going to help demystify artificial intelligence, challenging our perceptions of what it is and helping us to realise that AI is with us now and is not just an idea for the future. Farah, welcome to Catalyst Magazine Live.
Hello everybody, yes, my name is Farah and I am going to talk to you today about AI. But the title of my talk is What's the difference between a pigeon and an AI? And I'm going to start with the pigeon, which is here in this picture, and it's looking at a photograph of a slide, which is a microscope slide. We've magnified up some human tissue and the pigeon has been taught to recognise which is the healthy tissue and which is the one which is really unhealthy. Did you know pigeons could do this? Because I didn't. The pigeon takes about 2 weeks to learn and it can tell the difference from something that frankly I have no idea about. But can we teach machines to do the same thing? Yes, we can. So what you're thinking at the moment is, stop going on about pigeons, I want to know about AI. AI is about crunching numbers and words and pictures and all sorts of other information. To a computer, all that information is exactly the same. Underneath, it is translated into machine code, lots of zeros and ones. The AI doesn't actually know what is a number or a word or a picture. It just knows about the computer code. If you or me start looking at a table of numbers, really soon get very bored. And also it's really easy to get lost in them. It's so hard to find patterns when you're just looking at number after number after number. But the thing is that machines don't get bored and they're really good at spotting patterns in tables of numbers. And that's exactly why AI is helpful. It helps us because it's good at spotting patterns in lots and lots and lots of information. Perhaps you've heard of ChatGPT, which is a famous AI tool that is around at the moment. You can log in and ask it anything. So what did I do? I asked it, hey ChatGPT, what is AI? And this is what it told me. It says, finally, AI is the broadest term used to classify machines that mimic human intelligence. And goes on to tell about a few things that it might attempt to do, such as facial recognition. Okay, so that's a sentence in English, or a couple of sentences in what seems like English, and it is, okay, a decent interpretation of the question. Is the AI actually intelligent? We'll come to that question. It's quite philosophical. But the AI is very good at specific tasks, and it's good at finding patterns in lots of information. The other thing is that it will wait to be asked. You know, if it's me and I'm sitting around waiting, I'll find something to do. Maybe I'll doodle, maybe I'll go on the internet for a bit, maybe I'll stare at the clouds, maybe I'll watch TV, maybe I'll go and bother someone, see if they want to chat. AI isn't like that. It will just sit there and wait. It doesn't live in the real world. How does it do all this? We're going to explain. AI works because we give it lots and lots of examples. We call this example set data or information. The machine learns also because the human tells the machine what examples it's going to have and what's important about it, what patterns to look for. It won't be curious and go and look for patterns all on its own, just like you might go and look for patterns if you're doing something. And by patterns, I mean, observations about the world. So if I'm in my garden, I will notice that flowers start to come out in spring. Or if I'm cooking, I will notice the pattern that, look, I've added some heat and now something is beautifully browning in my pan and it smells delicious. AIs aren't like that. It will look for patterns when you tell it to. And it's very good at it. And once it's found a pattern, it can use those patterns to predict new data. And once we've predicted new data or new examples, we can feed it back into the system and start all over again. AI is already around us though. Let's do an example that you've probably seen. This is a sat nav. It might be in a car, or you might have it on a phone. And it works like this. Humans give the computer information, data. That's about road types, how cities are connected, what the speed limits are, whether there are toll roads. And then the computer links to a satellite, which tells you where you are. Then the human intervenes again and says where you want to go. Say you want to go from Birmingham to Edinburgh. Well, the computer's not going to say, hey, I think you're in Birmingham. Would you like to go to Edinburgh? No. It doesn't really care. It's up to you to decide where you want to go, and then you tell it. The computer then calculates loads of routes and presents you with the ones it thinks are best, usually which are the quickest. Maybe it's updating itself about traffic on the way so that it can take you around any blockages. And then it will give you instructions based on the information it has according to your position on the road. Great, this is classic machine learning. Humans have gathered lots of information, lots of data about roads. We've labelled it. What's a road? What's a landmark? What's a speed limit? And then we set the machine a task to find the quickest route. And for sure, this has absolutely transformed travel. Before sat-nav, and I remember these days, it was paper maps. You had to remember the route in your head, maybe have sticky notes all over the car. You'd stop at a service station when you got lost, maybe at the side of a road, and definitely argue with everyone else in the car. It's way better nowadays. Sat-nav is great. Sat-nav is also this. It works on the information that it has. And if the information is wrong or it's not clear enough, it might tell you something that doesn't really relate to the real world. For example, say it only has one label for country road. That could include everything from the dual carriageway of the A42 to a little country track that isn't really suitable for cars. It will advise you on the information it's got because that's all it has. It can't be sensible because it doesn't know about the real world. Sat-nav doesn't care if it's sunny, raining, snowy, if there are potholes. It'll say things like, turn now. And it doesn't need to know if it's safe if there's a lorry passing in front of the nose of your car because it has a human behind the wheel to figure out if it's safe. We could take this one step further, and this is where we go from what exists into the future and talk about a self-driving car. The thing is that the real world is jolly complicated. In this case, the sat-nav would need to go a step further and be aware of sun, rain, potholes, and become a self-driving AI. The world is complicated in ways that we don't really think about as humans. We encounter new stuff all the time, and humans are great at adapting to new situations. If there's snow or graffiti or a sticker, like on these stop signs, we know there's a sign underneath. Obviously, it says stop. These are American stop signs. We're not used to seeing these on our roads in the UK, but we can still tell it's a stop sign. And AI doesn't. It knows what it's seen before and can't make good guesses. In fact, the self-driving cars that are around at the moment get quite confused when you put little stickers. Maybe you didn't even notice the stickers in these photos, but an AI will get confused. What happens if something really unexpected happens, like a badger runs into the road, or there's a pothole that's appeared, or a tree grew over a traffic light? These are problems that we are still solving because AIs only work on information that it has seen before, and if it hasn't seen before, it finds it very tricky. Here's another example that you might have seen, which is shopping. The data that we feed the computer or the AI, or sometimes called an algorithm underneath, is it will know what you bought before. It will know what other people bought when buying the same things as you. So say you're buying some shoes and everybody else who buys shoes also buys socks. When you buy shoes, it will suggest, hey, you're buying shoes. Perhaps you'd like some socks. And maybe that is super helpful to you because you hadn't thought about socks. Maybe it's just trying to sell you more stuff and it's kind of annoying. Or maybe it will tempt you into buying something you didn't really want. It also has information about you. So for example, in your region, if you're buying shoes and it knows that you're in the UK and it's December, it might suggest to you woolly socks because it knows that people in your area are buying woolly socks. It doesn't know what winter is, but it does know there's a pattern. Whereas if you were in Australia in December, well, that's the middle of summer down there. So it might suggest little summer socks or maybe a sun hat or sunglasses to go with your shoes. Every time you look at something on the internet, it will store information about you to tell it what you're interested in. And it uses that to tempt you to buy more things, which kind of works really well. I don't know, I have a bit of a thing for online shopping and I'm sure I buy far too much stuff. But sometimes it's not helpful. If you buy a sofa, it's working on the information it's got. Hey, you looked at sofas. You just bought a sofa. It means you want a sofa. Here's more sofas. The chances are that if you bought a sofa, you don't want another sofa because there's a limit to the number of sofas you have. This is the limit of AI. It only works on information. It can't surprise you. Let's take a moment to think about where all these things run. An AI is a software app, basically, and that means it runs on a computer. Those computers have to be stored somewhere because computers are machines in the real world. The cloud, as we call it, is actually made of big buildings with millions of machines inside. And these are often located in cold places because computers get hot when they run. This photo is of a real, we call it a data center, which is basically a massive warehouse full of computers. This is Microsoft's one of their data centers. And inside, it looks like something out of a sci-fi movie, but it's all very real. And remember that each of these computers need creating, maintaining, they need energy. All of this uses the Earth's resources, maybe burning fossil fuels for electricity, because you can't choose where they're getting their electricity from. And it also needs paying for. If you're a website and you're a shopping website that sells you, I know, sofas, shoes, whatever it is, you need to put your website somewhere. It needs to run on a computer. You will be buying some time on these giant data centers. Back to how AI works then. We looked at this diagram earlier. We're giving the AI examples. We tell it to look for patterns, so it does, and then it uses that to predict new data. I've just put a little box in here to remind you that the humans are the ones that tell the computer what to do. We also program the AIs. It finds patterns, predicts new data. Is it intelligent? Well, let's see how intelligent we can make it. So I'm going to use an example here from an AI researcher called Janelle Shane. She works in America. And I'm playing the role of the person programming the AI here. Say, hey AI, that I've just programmed, make up 3 new ice cream flavors. Right, okay, so what do I need to do? Step 1, I need to feed it the data. So I'm going to give it some examples of ice cream flavors. This is just a screenshot from Wikipedia. I've given it a list. And then I'm also feeding it the contents of the English dictionary because I want it to find some words that aren't in the list that I've given it. Then I tell it, look for patterns, AI, and it chugs away and does its thing looking for patterns. Now I'm going to get it to predict some new information. Find me 3 new ice cream flavors. And here's what it's coming up with. Strawberry cream disease, silent cherry, and peanut butter slime. Yummy. Don't know about you, but I don't want to eat any of those. What what's happened here is that we've given the AI a really small list of examples to learn from. Given it lots of words to choose from, and those words had definitions. So it's kind of associated that ice cream has at least one word to do with food in it. That's a pattern it's spotted, which is great, but it doesn't understand what's ice cream or what makes it nice. So it predicts us some slightly strange results. How to make it better? Most of the time, the way to make AI better is to give it more examples. So here we've given it loads more examples, so many that the list is going off the screenshot that I've taken. So it's got lots and lots more information, and we're still feeding it the contents of the dictionary. So we're giving it more to chew on. So it's looking for patterns, and it's got more to examples to give it an idea or a flavour, if you will, of what is a good ice cream. What patterns can it spot now? Well, when we ask it to predict 3 new ice cream flavours, okay, it does a bit better actually. We've got chocolate, peanut, chocolate, chocolate, chocolate. I know, quite fancy that myself. Slightly weird name, but it's food. Beet bourbon, well, at least those are both food. Praline cheddar swirl. Not sure how I feel about cheese in my ice cream, but then one of the examples that was on the list from Wikipedia was bacon, so maybe that's not so far out. So we've given AI a bigger list and lots of words. Machine still doesn't live in the real world and still doesn't understand ice cream, but it had more information, so it's starting to make better guesses. And this is exactly what ChatGPT and other modern AIs do. So when I asked ChatGPT what is AI, it looked at all the information, the websites, books, blog posts, descriptions on videos, articles, scientific papers, comments, basically anything that it could find in its examples or in its data, and it looked for patterns. And it used those patterns to put together an answer for me, which is a pretty good answer. Notice that the sentence starts with finally, which is a bit weird. The machine finds patterns in language. It doesn't actually speak English. It's pretty good at knowing the patterns of English. And it knows that we often start sentences with words like finally or therefore, and it's picked one and it's put it at the start. So to my human brain, that's a bit surprising, but it's a pattern and it spotted it and it's given me an example of that pattern back to me. And that is also why it's important what kind of information, what kind of examples, what kind of data we feed AI. Does the information that we're feeding the AI represent the real world? Because if we feed the AI untrue data or biased data, it doesn't know. It's a machine. It's up to humans to give it good stuff, not junk. Because AI predicts new information based on patterns, that's what it's going to do. A recent case was a journalist who writes a particular type of article looked themselves up on ChatGPT and said, what kind of articles does this person themselves write? And ChatGPT gave them some real examples, but also made up some quite plausible article titles that this journalist had never written. It's not AI trying to fool you. It's trying to find a pattern and feed you back information that looks like the pattern that it's already got. It's its job. But it doesn't live in the real world. It's not concerned with truth. It's up to humans to give us information that is the world as it really is, not just how we see it. If we see the world in a really skewed way, so some people wrongly think that only boys can do science. So if they were to make an AI and feed the machine data about only boys doing science, then the machine will only ever tell us about boys doing science. We know that isn't true. Boys, girls, everyone can do science. But the machine doesn't care. We, as human beings, should. If we feed it data that's biased or has holes in it, we will get biased results with holes in it. So it's up to us to feed it good data, and that is the human responsibility. Let's return back to the beginning. So we started off with a pigeon, and the pigeon was looking at healthy samples of human tissue and unhealthy samples. I haven't been trained. I have no idea just from looking at these pink blobs what's healthy and what isn't. But after a couple of weeks of training, a pigeon can 8 times out of 10 select the right one. And in fact, if you put a row of pigeons together and take the collected results, you'll get about 99% accuracy. It's pretty good. And what the pigeon is doing there is spotting patterns. And AI is just as good, if not better, at doing the same thing. We give it examples of healthy tissue and unhealthy tissue, and it will be able to spot the difference. Of course, you can train humans to do this. If I spent some weeks studying, if you spent some weeks studying, I'm sure we'd learn to spot patterns as well. But the difference between these three are that an AI doesn't get tired. It just sits around waiting for the question. It just runs and runs and runs. A pigeon does live in the real world. Of course, it needs to eat and sleep and fly around and sit on top of statues' heads. But it can't tell you when it's surprised. A human can tell you when it's surprised, but again, we've got other things to do with our lives and we have a limited attention span. So AIs have an advantage in that they can keep running and running. But hey, how would you feel if a doctor sent a sample to a computer, to an AI to analyze, or to a pigeon, or to a human to look at? How does that make you feel? Because that's the future, right? That we've got a combination of artificial intelligences helping us to interpret the world and other kinds of intelligences. Pigeons aren't usually used in medicine. This was an experiment, but who knows in the future? Certainly humans are involved. How do you think the world's going to change?
Thank you, Farah. That was absolutely fascinating. I have a whole new respect for pigeons and ice cream choices. We have quite a few questions in our chat, so we'll move straight into those. And the first question is:
we know there are some issues with current AI and machine learning, such as hand drivers not recognizing skin color. How can we correct this or prevent similar issues in the future?
Yeah, that is a really big question, and it really is about what we feed the AI. And the reason that AIs have problems with things like skin color is because they've been fed only data with one type of skin color. So the answer to that is to give it better information to start with, to give it better and more diverse examples of all the kind of people that we have in the world. And then it will learn to spot patterns in all the kind of people in the world. So the problem is really that we haven't given it good enough data. We fed it biased data. We need to give it better data so that it can learn. And that's a human responsibility. That's not the AI's fault. That's for us as people to do better.
We have another question. If we tell AI what to learn and which patterns to look for, what are experts so worried about?
Yeah, well, there are a few things. The first is back to what data are we feeding it, and it's only going to find patterns in the data that it's got. The second thing is also that we don't know every decision that it's making on the way. We ask it to find a pattern, but we don't know how it found that pattern. So if it is spotting a pattern in the data that you want it to, say it's looking for shapes, and it's a good predictor, maybe if it sees something that's a slightly different shape, it won't understand. It's really difficult to unpick what it's trying to tell us. It gives us results, and we might say those results are great, but how did it do it? Does it tell us anything that we can learn about the world? And is it important that we know how it got there? Sometimes it's a bit obscure. There was an example where some researchers gave an AI pictures of skin moles to see whether they were healthy or not, whether it could spot cancers. And the famous example was that the AI narrowly predicted which ones had the problems, which ones had cancer. But it did that because in all the medical photographs, all the moles with cancer had a ruler next to them. It was just the pattern it had found was ones with cancer have ruler next to them because they're medical photographs, not just ordinary photographs. So in that case, the AI had picked a pattern, but it wasn't really working in the way that we thought. Be aware also that computers don't think like us. In a computer simulation where there was an AI, there was a grid, and we put the AI as a kind of starting dot in the corner, and we said, hey, can you get to the other end of the grid? So as humans, we might think it might find a path, and then it will find a good route from one end of the screen to the other. Nuh-uh, that is not what the computer did. It grew itself really tall and then fell over. It reached the other side, but it didn't really answer the pattern question that we wanted. So because machines don't think in the same way that we do, we have to be a little bit careful about how we use them, because we might be making assumptions about what it's finding just because it gives us a plausible result.
I actually have a question from the audience that they'd like to put to you live, if that's okay. So I'm going to hand over to one of our audience member, if you'd like to take over at this point.
Hi, Farah. I'm Diane. I think some of the concerns about AI is worries about them actually developing intelligence and what type of intelligence that might be. My question is, if we're providing the data and if we're telling AI what's important, some of this will be based on my own beliefs and values. So is there a risk or an opportunity maybe that the AI bot that I'm speaking to might start to develop a personality, that they'll start to adopt some of my beliefs and values and guide their responses to me based on that?
Yeah, that is such a good question. And I feel like there's two parts to that. One is the much deeper question of whether an AI is actually being intelligent. And from the technology where we are right now, we're quite far from that, quite far from an intelligence being self-aware. And that's because everything that we've created so far is basically number crunching and trying to use information that we've given it to provide us with information that looks likely based on what it has already. So it may happen in the future that it is more aware. Right now, that's not the case. However, because artificial intelligences are starting to use live data, in other words, if you're chatting with it, it will take the information that you've given it, add that to its database, add that to all the examples that it's got, and use that to push that back at you, then certainly it will start to look for patterns that match the sorts of things that you're asking it. Which means that if you have particular values or beliefs and you're expressing them in your questions, then it will match those to information that it has and try and give you answers based on things that match similar values and beliefs. So I think, yes, that is a risk that you will end up in a bit of a bubble. We call an echo chamber, where you kind of hear your own voice bouncing back at you. And it's very difficult to get out of that because the AI is just finding patterns based on what you've told it. It's not going to surprise you or challenge you. But is it really intelligent? I think that's a separate question, and we're not there. If it feels like it's answering something based on knowing you, that's because it has information similar to what you're asking. It's not really aware. However, yes, absolutely be careful, because everything you give it is going into the information and guiding what kind of patterns it's looking for.
Thank you, Farah. We have another question for you, which is again going to be asked live. So I think it's Jack who's going to ask you a question now.
I certainly am. Hi there, Farah. I've really enjoyed today's session. My question to you is a more general one. So what are the most common changes that you expect to see in the lives of individuals from the use of AI?
Yeah. I think there's so much around at the moment that can help us. One of the things that I'm seeing is definitely getting AIs to help us maybe write prettier words and nicer paragraphs. So because AI has examples of really good writing, for example, I think people will be using that to help them write good sentences and nice explanations. I think people will also be asking it questions like you might ask a search engine like Google or Bing or something like that. But again, be careful, because sometimes it makes things up because it's just trying to give you a pattern. I think recognizing faces is one thing that is already happening, and how people around the world use that in terms of governments and things to see what everybody's up to. I think that's a big thing. The field that I work in, I work for a company which tries to discover new medicines, and we do that using a lot of AI as well. And we're not the only company. There are lots of people out there doing that. So I think there will be more discoveries in science based on help and number crunching. So we generate so much information all the time. Everything you type in, every scientist that does a research, every artist that publishes a poem on the internet, all of that goes into the great stack of data that we've got. And it's impossible to sift through as a human. There's just too much of it. So I think that processing all that information will be a big deal. Hopefully we'll get better things like better at predicting weather and maybe climate change and stuff like that, because computers will be better able to crunch numbers. And I think also that's where it will start to really touch our lives is in really subtle ways where we're not quite aware that AIs have been helping. Maybe a video has been edited with the help of AI. Maybe pictures have been created with the help of AI. Maybe there's human creativity, but a writer has been helped by AI to write an article or a book, and we won't necessarily always know. So I think there are lots of really obvious ways that we can say, hey, AI, do a thing for me. But I think there are lots of other subtle ways where we will see information being gathered and hopefully being used for good purposes, like finding new medicines and helping us to navigate the world, but also might be used to sell you things or to see what you're up to, and hopefully governments in parts of the world will be sensible about the way they use it and allow people to continue to be free to do what they want to do.
Thank you. We have very brave audience members today. We have a live question for you, so if we can hand over to Christina.
Hi, Farah. Just to say this is a great webinar, by the way, especially for a complete novice like myself. So my question is, what sort of jobs, or do you know of any jobs in the future that we might be in danger of sort of losing to AI?
Yeah, and a lot of people are really worried about computers kind of taking over, and this could be anything from maybe stacking a warehouse where a computer drives all the robots to take down everything from the shelves and pack it and do everything from the moment you click on the web to the moment the parcel gets put in the hands of a delivery person, through to kind of administration tasks. So maybe planning, people doing planning things, such as timetables or events organizers. Maybe AIs will take over that. In the field that I am in, which is software, which means developing apps, basically, people are worried that computers will program themselves, or that perhaps young programmers won't need to learn kind of the structures of programs because they can just ask an AI to write something for them. To my mind, I think that there will be things that computers will do well, especially where it's a computer can do much better than a person. So say we have things like image recognition. We talked a little bit about samples and analyzing samples, like medical samples, things like that. I think AIs will work a lot quicker than people in those kind of areas. However, I think a lot of the things that people are worried about actually turn out to be jobs that humans find quite dull generally. They're quite repetitive. That's what computers are good at. That's what AIs are great at. They're great at crunching through lots of information. And for me, what that means is that hopefully people can be left to do the fun, creative stuff. So in my job, when I started 20 years ago, I did lots of experiments in the lab, and a lot of it was very manual. I did a lot of putting sample A into jar over there, and then into a test tube, and then into a machine, and then pressing a button, and then getting some results, and then getting a printout, and then putting it into a spreadsheet, and then running some statistics. And oh, good gracious, you know, a lot of work. Now, somebody's still preparing the samples usually, but after that, the machine moves the sample around, runs the analysis, and then puts the data together and starts to spot some patterns for me. So would I be out of a job? Well, no, clearly not, because I get to do the interesting things. I get to think of the questions that I ask the computer. I get to look at the results and interpret them in the real world, which to me is a lot more interesting than moving test tubes around or looking at spreadsheets full of numbers. I am very glad to have the help of AI. So yes, there will be jobs that disappear, but I think that it opens up so many exciting things for the next generation coming up, because you get to do the fun stuff because you won't have to plod through quite as much of the dull stuff. This computer will do it for you.
Thank you. We are moving on to the penultimate question, which is, do you expect to see a rise and increase in the number of jobs in the field of digital anthropology?
Digital anthropology? Good gracious, yes, because this is almost the new world that we're living in. This is about seeing how humans interact with this new world that we've created. Is that the right take on digital anthropology that you have in mind?
I'm not certain because the person who's asked it isn't in a position to be able to add further information at this point. So let's just say yes.
Okay, so I'm taking digital anthropology as how people, anthropos being the Greek for a person, deals with this new world that we've created in the digital era, how we react to it, how society changes, how these different systems even interact with each other, and how that affects the real world, both in terms of what we put in and what we take out of it. I think it's fascinating. I know that there have been lots of studies done over the last 10 years on things like the impact of social media, and I'm sure that will be expanded to include AI. Utterly fascinating in terms of how our societies develop, and indeed how people who are lucky enough to have access to loads of technology, how those people's lives will change, and how potentially either a gap might grow between them and people who don't have access to all the technology, or perhaps how we might use technology to bridge gaps. So yeah, really interesting future, really interesting field. If you're interested, great. I can't wait to see what you come up with.
And moving on to our final question, perhaps a little more thought-provoking and looking for your personal take on this one. AI has such potential to influence the world around us, but just because we can use AI to do something, should we? Should we have rules that govern its use?
Yeah, and that is an absolutely critical question. And my personal take would be yes. There have been recent cases where people have let AIs be available on the internet, and people have fed it live information, and it's turned pretty nasty pretty quickly. Now, I do believe in the good of people in general. I think most people are generally just out to do their best. The sad thing is that people who aren't out to do their best are generally quite loud and like to spoil things. So I do think there should be safeguards. And in fact, if you look at something like ChatGPT, there are safeguards in place there at the moment. There are certain things that it will not answer, or that it is programmed to try and recognize, and it will say, I'm sorry, I can't answer this. I'm an AI, and this is not an appropriate question for me to answer. So ChatGPT even has safeguards within it. And this is really down to experience of the people who really want to create bias in the world, to feed it bad data, are often the really active ones, and can in fact then bias the system against the rest of us who are out to do our best. So I personally think that yes, safeguards are important. As to just because we can do a thing, should we do a thing? Yeah, big philosophical question. The answer isn't always yes. In this case, I think we're exploring the boundaries at the moment. I think there are places where we can use it for really excellent things, and for discovering patterns that just with a human brain we just can't, just because we can't cope with those kind of numbers. But kind of back to the central point of being always aware that an AI or any computer system does not live in the real world. And regardless of how intelligent we might make it, it will never be able to enjoy ice cream. And we should always remember that, I think, as something to bear in mind when we think that it understands. Just remind yourself, if you enjoy ice cream or any other food or anything else in life, it can't. That is its limitation. And we should safeguard ourselves by keeping a little bit of healthy skepticism and awareness of the tools that we are using when we use them, and try and use them in the best way possible and not let other people spoil it for us.
Thank you. That is a great response to the question. Really appreciate it. We've come to the end of the session. So thank you, Farah, for such a great introduction to artificial intelligence. It is amazing how much AI surrounds our lives, with most of us not realizing it. And I have a new respect for pigeons. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. And thank you to our audience joining us today. Enjoy the rest of your day and remember to take part in the rest of our STEM Clubs Week content, looking at AI, the world and you. Goodbye, everyone.